The morning sun cast its gentle light over our suburban enclave, a meticulously manicured mosaic of homogeneity. Each house stood like a neatly wrapped gift, differing only in the slightest shades of beige or gray. Here the whisper of the wind through hedgerows was almost as loud as a shout. I had just finished placing the last of my autumn decorations, a cheerful scarecrow with a bright orange scarf, when the unmistakable figure of Karen approached. She was a specter in pastels, her sharp eyes scanning the neighborhood like a hawk assessing its territory. Karen, the self-appointed guardian of our homeowners association, was notorious for her vigilance. For her, the world was divided into clear lines of right and wrong, and the boundaries were often drawn by her own whims. Her presence was like a cool breeze on a warm day, unsettling yet almost refreshing in its predictability. She paused at the edge of my lawn, her gaze zeroing in on the scarecrow. I watched her from the corner of my eye, pretending to adjust a pumpkin, my neutral mask firmly in place. I knew what was coming. An infringement of some obscure HOA regulation, perhaps a critique of my choice of decor. But instead of confrontation, I found myself reflecting on the gentle absurdity of it all. How a woman could become so consumed by the minutiae of conformity, so entangled in the smallness of rules. Her footsteps receded, leaving only the impression of a storm gathering strength. The tranquility of my morning was a fragile thing, like the gossamer threads of a spider's web glistening with dew. It was beautiful, but it wouldn't last. Later, I discovered her complaint. A formal letter slipped into my mailbox detailing the alleged violations of my decor: a few too many pumpkins, the scarecrow's scarf a shade too bright. It was almost laughable. Almost. I entertained the idea of a measured response, a pointed letter of rebuttal, perhaps. But something inside me whispered, patience. The scales of justice, I believed, have a way of balancing themselves, so I chose quiet defiance. I left the decorations as they were a silent testament to the spirit of the season. For every rule there is a story, and mine was one of quiet resistance, a stone cast into the placid waters of HOA conformity, sending ripples far and wide. Then came the day when the air crackled with anticipation. I had just settled into a comfortable chair on my porch, the chill of autumn gnawing gently at my fingertips, when the sound of a police siren shattered the afternoon's peace. Karen had called the authorities over the decorations, her determination a blunt instrument wielded with zeal. But what unfolded next was a scene imbued with irony. The officers, having been summoned, turned their attention not to my harmless pumpkins and scarecrow, but to the very woman who had become their herald. Karen, as it turned out, was not without sin. Her backyard a veritable sanctuary. A violation stood in stark contrast to her public persona. A shed too many the garish colors that flouted the HOA's sacred edicts. In that moment, I saw the universe's quiet sense of humor, its penchant for poetic justice. And as Karen's protests rose to meet the autumn breeze, I found serenity in the swirl of fallen leaves, the promise of a season turning, and the knowledge that sometimes patience is the most profound form of power. The echoes of Karen's indignant voice still clung to the whispers of last night's wind like a stubborn fog refusing to dissipate. Her shrill complaints had summoned police officers to my doorstep over something as innocuous as decorations, which to her were apparently as egregious as a blight. Her disdain swirled around our neighborhood like a toxic perfume, and I could feel its tendrils reaching out, attempting to strangle the life out of anything that dared to deviate from her rigid idea of order. In the morning light, the absurdity of it all seemed sharper. My decorations, simple, festive, imbued with personal meaning, stood innocently in their places, unscathed by the night's drama. Yet it was not the decorations under scrutiny, but rather the audacity of my individuality against the monochrome backdrop of conformity she championed. My thoughts swirled like leaves caught in a tempest as I surveyed the scene. A strange pang of defiance rippled through me. These decorations were more than mere objects. They were symbols of a quiet rebellion. Karen, however, was far from finished. She was a force of nature. A storm brewed from the teapot of her own making, and she was gathering momentum. By mid-morning, a letter slid under my door, a missive in officious font and clipped tone bristling with allegations of violations of HOA ordinances. It was as though she had scoured the rule book, bent on finding every arcane bylaw I might have unwittingly bent. Her scrutiny was relentless, like a hawk searching for prey in an open field. The citations were ludicrous, a parody of governance. The height of my garden gnome trio was apparently a half-inch too tall. The hue of my front door too daring in its cheerful shade of blue. Each point she listed felt like a personal vendetta, wrapped in the guise of community welfare. As I read, a sardonic smile tugged at my lips. Irony dripped from every line, for beneath her veneer of propriety, Karen herself had become entangled in the web of rules she wielded like a weapon. Rumors spread like wildfire in our neighborhood. Gossip was the lifeblood of this community, carrying tales from porch to porch, with a speed rivaling that of light. From my window, I watched Karen, a general, marshaling her troops, whispering to neighbors who nodded with the eagerness of conspirators. Their glances flitted towards my house, eyes brimming with a curious blend of curiosity and caution. I was the outsider, the outlier in her perfectly curated world, and she was the gatekeeper determined to preserve her kingdom. But irony has a way of creeping up on the unsuspecting. The police had taken an interest in the situation not merely because of Karen's incessant calls, but because they too were subject to the same rules. It was whispered that Karen's backyard, hidden behind a facade of perfection, was a treasure trove of violations, non-compliant fencing, unauthorized structures, each contravening the very ordinances she so zealously enforced. It was almost poetic, this unraveling of her authority. I wondered if she knew if the irony of it all had dawned upon her, or if she continued her crusade oblivious to the fact that her own fortress was crumbling. The thought was a quiet comfort. In this theater of the absurd, Karen was merely another actor caught in the web of her making. As the day waned, I stood on my porch, the cool evening air wrapping around me like a cloak. The decorations glowed softly resilient against the oncoming night. They were more than decor. They were my statement, my silent rebellion in a world demanding conformity. And as I watched the stars flicker to life, I knew a new act would soon begin. The stage was set, and I was ready. Rain pattered softly against the windows as the evening crept in, casting elongated shadows across the living room. I sat at my oak desk, the soft glow of the lamp illuminating a clutter of documents. Each paper held a fragment of truth, a shard of the reality I had crafted with meticulous precision. Tonight was the night Karen would find herself ensnared in her own web, I glanced at the clock, its hands moving with methodical patience, much like my own over the past weeks. After her theatrics with the police, I had decided to play a longer game. One she wouldn't even know she was a part of until it was too late. The neighborhood had its secrets, and those secrets whispered to me through the rustle of leaves and the echo of footsteps down our quiet street. Karen's penchant for rule-breaking was hidden beneath layers of self-righteousness and hypocrisy. It was time to peel those back. With each document, I had sketched a portrait of her reign over the HOA infractions, overlooked fines, bylaws, bent and reshaped to suit her whims. The irony was stark. The very codes she wielded like a battle axe against our decorations were the same. She shattered beneath her heeled boots. The rain intensified a symphony of nature's fury, perhaps an omen or just my imagination giving it life. I smirked at the thought nature had no need to conspire with me. Karen's downfall was her own making. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting a pale luminescence on the path leading to her house. I imagined her there behind the lace curtains, oblivious to the storm I had set in motion. Tomorrow, the HOA meeting would bring it all crashing down. I shuffled the papers, ensuring every page was in order. Each page was a meticulous brushstroke painting a vivid picture of Karen's defiance against the community she claimed to protect. The irony was delicious. It wasn't just about decorations or petty disputes. It was about control power and the brittle facade she had constructed. And like any facade, it would crumble under scrutiny. I took a deep breath, letting the satisfaction settle in the spaces between my thoughts. The plan was as simple as it was poetic. No confrontation, no raised voices, just the quiet delivery of truth, naked and undeniable, carried on the crisp paper of bylaws and minutes. In the quiet of my home, I pondered the nature of justice. It wasn't always loud or explosive. Often it unfolded in silence, in the slow unraveling of lies. This was my small act of rebellion, a gentle reminder that even the mighty must fall. The clock chimed the hour, a reminder of the passage of time, relentless and impartial. Tomorrow I would stand amidst the polished veneer of the HOA meeting papers in hand, ready to reveal the truth in front of her facade. For now, I let the rain serenade me into the night, each droplet a testament to the quiet power of persistence. In the end, Karen would learn that true strength lay not in bluster and bravado, but in the subtlety of truth, whispered in the right ears. The morning light streamed through my curtains, breaking into a soft glow that painted the room in hues of gold. The silence felt thick, almost as if it were holding its breath in anticipation. Outside, the soundtrack of the neighborhood began to play, a dog barking in the distance, the hum of a lawnmower starting its day, and leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. But beneath it all, there was something else. A murmur of tension that rippled through the air like an undercurrent. Word had started to spread. It began as a whisper, a soft susurration between fences and over morning coffee. Neighbors exchanged glances, a mix of curiosity and disbelief painted on their faces like a shared, unspoken secret. The sight of Karen being escorted into a patrol car, hands cuffed, had etched itself into the collective memory of the street. There was irony in this, a poetic justice that wasn't lost on anyone. I took a sip of my coffee, the warmth seeping through the mug into my palms. It was strange how something so simple could feel like an anchor amidst the swirling drama. The decorations in my yard swayed gently, defiantly. vibrant against the backdrop of manicured monotony. They had become a symbol now, a silent rebellion against the draconian grip of the HOA. Karen had overplayed her hand. Her attempts to enforce her will had backfired spectacularly, and in doing so, she had unwittingly revealed the fragility of her own standing. Her fortress of control, once impregnable, was now crumbling, exposed by the very rules she wielded like weapons. The irony was exquisite. Neighbors began gathering in small clusters, their conversations punctuated by furtive glances toward Karen's house. Her absence loomed large, a void that accentuated her previous omnipresence. It was as if the neighborhood had taken a collective breath released from an invisible tension that had long held it in thrall. I watched as children played in the street, their laughter a bright ribbon cutting through the atmosphere, their innocence untouched by the complexities surrounding them was a balm. It reminded me of the simple pleasures that Karen's reign had often overshadowed. Inside, there was a quiet satisfaction, not of victory, but of balance restored. The police had found her in violation of multiple HOA ordinances, a twist of fate that was almost too perfect. The meticulous notes she'd kept on everyone, the infraction she documented so zealously, had ensnared her. Her own words were her undoing. I placed my cup down the clink against the table, a small punctuation in the morning's unfolding story. The day stretched ahead full of potential. There was a sense of unity now, a shared understanding that perhaps things could be different. Better. In the distance, a car door slammed, breaking the momentary peace. A figure stepped out. Karen returned, but changed. Her shoulders were drawn tight, her steps measured. The watchers turned their attention, razor sharp, waiting. This time her presence did not dominate. It was met with the quiet strength of a community, no longer willing to be cowed. There was power in this silence, more eloquent than any confrontation. It spoke of a collective defiance, a quiet rebellion against oppression. As I turned back toward my home, a single sentence floated through my mind. Simple, yet profound. It was over. Not with a bang, but with the soft, steady resolve of those who had finally found their voice. The sound of the gavel echoed in my mind long after the courtroom fell silent. It was a peculiar kind of music, a symphony composed of justice and inevitability. I had watched many courtroom dramas on TV, but reality had a way of being both more raw and more poetic. Here in this almost sacred space, the scales tipped in my favor, but I'm getting ahead of myself. It started small, like a pebble dislodged from a precarious hill. Karen's voice was shrill and insistent, a mosquito buzzing in the summer heat. Her complaints to the HOA board were as predictable as the seasons. My Halloween decorations had been her latest target, a minor skirmish in our ongoing war, but it was her call to 911 reporting an imagined violation that turned the tide. Ironically, it was that call which led to her own unraveling. The police arrived not as her allies, but as impartial arbiters. How strange, then, that their routine checks unveiled her own non-compliance with the HOA's sacred tome of rules. It was almost poetic. The very regulations she wielded like a sword were the ones that would ultimately pierce her armor. The board meeting that followed felt like a chess game. Each move calculated, each piece strategically placed. I had learned the art of quiet patience, of letting the world unravel in its own time, as Karen raged and sputtered, her facade cracking under the weight of her own hypocrisy. I remained calm. Each rule she had broken was laid bare, a tapestry of negligence and arrogance. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The board's decision was swift and unanimous. Her fines were substantial, the consequences clear. But I wanted more than just a financial victory. I wanted change. I had been quietly gathering signatures, a coalition of the disgruntled, the weary, the silenced neighbors who had suffered under her reign, who had watched from the sidelines as she wielded power like a tyrant. Together we filed a motion to recall her from her position on the board, a subtle coup executed with precision and grace. She was blindsided. I could see it in her eyes, the dawning realization that her empire was crumbling. It was not the joy of victory I felt, but a deep sense of justice, a restoration of balance. In the following weeks, the neighborhood began to transform. Lawns grew wild and beautiful decorations flourished in a riot of creativity. It was as if the very air had shifted, a collective sigh of relief. I still see Karen sometimes, a shadow of her former self. Her gaze wary and uncertain. Our interactions are cordial, though tinged with an unspoken understanding. She is no longer my adversary, simply another resident of this small community. As I walk through the neighborhood, I am reminded of the power of quiet persistence. Like water carving through stone, change does not always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it is the gentle, persistent pressure that shapes the world. In the end, maybe that's the greatest revenge of all. Not the fall of a foe, but the rise of a community stronger and more united than before. The early morning sun painted the street in golden hues, casting long shadows that danced upon the pavement. It was a new day, one that promised clarity, even as the air still held the echo of last night's chaos. Karen's call to 911 had been her final gambit, her shrill voice, a siren, announcing her desperation. I stood on my porch, the faint chill of the railing grounding me in this moment. Across the street, Karen's manicured lawn lay pristine, a facade of order in stark contrast to the storm that brewed within her. She had spent years weaving her web of control, her life, a meticulous masterpiece of rules and restrictions, each thread tighter than the last. But like all things stretched too thin, it was bound to snap. The police, still parked discreetly down the block, had become familiar faces in our neighborhood. Their presence, once a tool of intimidation, now seemed almost comforting. Last night they had crossed from Karen's property to mine, a symbolic shift that had not gone unnoticed by the gathering residents. They discovered her violations tucked away behind her white picket veneer. Unapproved structures, unsanctioned installations, a hidden world of her own making. The irony was as thick as the morning fog. The very codes she had weaponized against us had become her undoing. I watched as neighbors, once silent out of fear or apathy, began to stir. They emerged tentatively like flowers daring to bloom in a harsh climate, whispering amongst themselves, glancing furtively at Karen's fortress. A movement caught my eye. A child, her bright backpack bobbing as she skipped down the sidewalk, past Karen's house. Past the whispers, past the memories of tension. She embodied resilience, an innocence immune to the pettiness of adult conflicts. Her presence was a balm, a reminder that life continued, that communities could heal. I walked over to the edge of my property where a small crowd had gathered. Conversations flowed like a gentle stream, words of shared relief and newfound courage. I had spent too long on the periphery, a silent observer in the theater of Karen's reign. Today, I stepped into the fold, feeling the warmth of collective resolve. Karen's door remained shut, a fortress breached yet unyielding. I wondered what thoughts churned behind her drawn curtains. Did she see the irony, the futility of her crusade? Perhaps in the silence of her self-imposed exile, she would find clarity. Or perhaps not. The police cruiser finally departed, its engine a low hum that faded into the distance. It left behind an unspoken promise of peace, of understanding, of a return to simpler times, when community meant more than rules and regulations. I turned back to my front yard, a blank canvas awaiting new beginnings. There would be new decorations, perhaps, but this time, they would be a celebration, not a statement, a testament to resilience and the quiet power of standing firm in the face of adversity. As I glanced back at the crowd, someone caught my eye. A neighbor I had only known in passing, now offering a small nod of acknowledgement, a gesture of unity. It was enough. With a deep breath, I embraced the morning, the promise it held. Karen might have cast a long shadow, but the sun was rising higher, burning through the fog. Our community was waking up, eyes wide open, ready to step into the light.